It would be a mistake to think that deontologists don't care about the consequences of their actions. What distinguishes deontological theories from their consequentialist rivals is that they believe that the morality of our actions depends on whether we are fulfilling our obligations and not on whether we are achieving the best results. This allows them to draw a line and say that there are some things we should not do, regardless of how much good we might achieve. The ends do not justify the means. The most well known deontologist in philosophy is Kant. He was convinced that there is a universal morality that tells us how to act. He spoke here of a categorical imperative. Morality takes the form of an imperative, otherwise known as a command, because it tells us what to do. It is categorical because Kant thought that it applies to each of us unconditionally. For example, if you go see an advisor and they tell you to take a certain class if you're going to major in business, the advisor is giving you a hypothetical imperative. You are being told to take that class, but only conditionally. If you don't want to be a business major, the command does not apply to you. Kant thought that morality is not like that. It applies to all of us unconditionally. This led Kant to the idea that morality cannot be based on feelings, subjective or cultural values, particular religious faiths, upbringing, or anything else that will vary from one person to the next. Instead, he claimed that to be universal, morality must be based on reason. We each should be able to apply our reason and see why certain ways of doing things don't make sense. The key here seems to be the idea that for our choices to make sense, they need to exhibit a certain kind of consistency. For example, Kant asks us to consider the personal policies we follow when we make decisions. Let's say that I promise to take you to the airport next week if you will help me move some furniture in my house today, but I have no intention of carrying through on my promise after I get your help. Instead, I'm going to come up with an excuse next week that I think you'll find convincing. My policy, or maxim as Kant calls it, in this situation, is to use a false promise in cases like this when I think it will benefit me. Kant asks us to imagine everybody following this policy, and he thinks we will quickly see that it would not work. I can only take advantage of you here if you trust me, and that trust will not exist if we are all following my maxim. So my policy can only work if the rest of you are not doing what I'm doing. Kant thinks that this reveals a type of practical inconsistency. I'm effectively saying that I get to make false promises, but the rest of you can't, and I have no way of justifying this double standard. Kant also applies this approach to our values. He thinks that each of us, as rational agents, expects to be treated with a certain type of respect and consideration. We don't want people to treat us like objects, to coerce us or manipulate us with no concern for what we want or what is important to us. This leads Kant to conclude that, to be consistent, we must treat other people with similar respect and consideration. Kant also seemed to think that if we used his approach, we would be able to derive a set of simple rules that we should follow without exception. For instance, he thought we would be able to see that it is always wrong to lie, no matter what. Most philosophers who are otherwise sympathetic to his ethical theory today disagree with him on this point. They prefer Kantianism without absolutism. Another non-absolutist deontological theory was developed by W.D. Ross in the last century. While Kant tried to show the steps involved in applying reason to determine our ethical duties, Ross thought that if we thought about it carefully, it would just be obvious what our basic obligations are. He called these our prima facie duties. Prima facie here means based on initial appearances or at first sight, but this name can be somewhat misleading. He did not mean to suggest that if we research them, we might discover that this first impression was misleading and that these are not our duties at all. Instead, he was recognizing that we have certain general obligations, but they are not absolutes. Let's say, for instance, that I need to lie to a Nazi to save an innocent person's life. While it is generally wrong to lie, it is also important to protect innocent people from being murdered. Here, I cannot do both, and I have to figure out which of my general obligations should take priority in this situation. Here it seems obvious which to prioritize. Overall, Ross thought we have to do our best to appreciate the complexity of some of the choices we face in life and try to determine which of our prima facie duties should be given priority. Many have worried, though, that this approach does not offer us enough guidance and relies too heavily on our moral intuitions.